Good morning and welcome to War Thunder's website. I'm Old Dead Man. We've got a couple of dev blogs from last week that got buried in everything else going on. I'll have the F5A later today to go up as well. And we'll probably be looking for, since I did the Battle Pass vehicles when I discussed the Battle Pass, we'll be skipping all of those dev blogs. But I'll put some links in the description of this one so you can jump over and see those dev blogs if you would like. Today we're going to address the two Ratel-based ICVs that were introduced as part of the new the new South African tech tree that is a sub of the British tree, and we'll take a look at what those two are kind of bringing to the table. Now, in both cases, the history section that Gaijin has put together is excellent, and I was not able to find any real additional information except for maybe a few niggly details that I added to them. So, let's see what we got. First up is the Ratel 90. The Ratel 90 was a variation on the Ratel infantry combat vehicle designed and utilized by the South African military. This model includes a 90mm cannon mounted in the turret. The Ratel 90 measures in at 7.21 meters long, 2.5 meters wide, and 2.91 meters high, or several feet longer than the 1980s era Winnebago. She is powered by a Bussing D3256 BTXF 6-cylinder turbocharged diesel, producing 275 horsepower to carry her 19 tons of weight and 3-man crew around to speeds up to 105 kilometers per hour. The screenshots shown are from the first dev server for Ixwa Strike, so the numbers may and probably will change. War Thunder's researchers included this summary of the vehicle's history. Quote, in the late 1960s, the South African military began changing its doctrine toward highly mobile warfare, embodied by small mechanized infantry units. The change in doctrine was necessitated when the military realized that the heavy armor faced extreme difficulties operating in rural areas of the country. As a result, the Army needed a new ICV not only to ferry troops into battle, but also to actively support them in the field. To that extent, a basic requirement for an ICV was formulated, and a number of both domestic as well as foreign designs were evaluated. The domestic Springfield Bussing Company developed a promising 6-wheel ICV prototype, called the Buffle, constructed on the basis of a manned truck. The further developed Buffle prototype was eventually selected for procurement and entered service with the military as the Ratel. Production of the Ratel began in the mid-1970s after a limited initial batch of production vehicles successfully underwent testing. Being a family of fighting vehicles, the Ratel came in various modifications, including the base model armed with a 20mm cannon, 2 mortar versions, a close fire support variant armed with a 90mm gun, as well as a command and ATGM carrier modifications. The Ratels served in numerous conflicts since their first introduction in the mid-1970s, with nearly all of its active service taking place on the African continent. The Ratel 90 saw its first combat use in 1980 during the South African Border War, where Ratel 90 anti-tank teams came face-to-face with T-54s and 55s on multiple occasions. By the end of production in 1993, some 1,304 Ratels were produced across all variants. Due to its simplistic design and perfect fit for the dry climate of sub-Saharan Africa, the Ratel proved at home in the Middle East and Northwest Africa. As a result, around a dozen more nations, excluding South Africa, still operate the Ratel ICV. Close quote. In War Thunder, the Ratel 90 is joining the British Rank 4 tech tree, sporting 282 horsepower, a 105 km per hour top speed, a weight of 20.1 tons to make 14 horsepower per ton. The mobility on-road is expected to be decent, but off-road, not. In that same vein, the armor is unlikely to protect you from much of anything. As of the dev server, it was listed with a BR of 6.7 at the start of the South African tech subtree. Alright, we're going to move on to the Ratel ZT3-A2. The Ratel ZT3-A2 is another modification of the Ratel infantry combat vehicle. You take an ATGM launcher and plunk it on top of the same Ratel. Voila! Screenshots are also from the first dev server, so numbers will likely change. Gaijin's historical summary is likewise good, so I've merely reused it here. Quote, in the early 1960s, the South African military already identified the need for an anti-tank missile capabilities. Subsequently, this led to South Africa procuring the Milan ATGM in the early to mid 1970s. However, early use experience with the Milan highlighted the weapon's unsuitability for the African tropical conditions. Being a wire-guided missile, the Milan's control wire had a tendency to get caught up in the thick African bush and get severed, causing the missile to go off target and making engaging moving targets even more challenging. As a result, the decision was made to procure a laser-guided missile. However, as international arms embargoes were imposed on South Africa, simply acquiring an existing weapon off the export market wasn't possible. Therefore, South African engineers at the Kintron Company went about designing their own laser-guided ATGM in the late 70s. The result of this undertaking was the creation of the ZT3 missile system. By the time the ZT3 system had been ready for production in 1986, plans were being drawn up for a modified Ratel 20 housing the newly developed ZT3 missile launcher and a modified Ratel 60 turret. The modified Ratel with the ZT3 missile system was developed in order to supplement the Ratel 90s in anti-tank operations, as the latter often struggled to engage heavy armor in direct combat. The Ratel ZT3-A1 entered production in 1987, and around 90 vehicles of the type had been built by 1993. The ZT3-A2 was introduced in 2008 and continues its successful operation with SANDF units until the present day. End quote. In War Thunder, as of this dev server, the Ratel ZT3-A2 will be joining the British rank 6 tree as part of the South African subtree at 8.7 BR. And that's a couple of the vehicles coming up in War Thunder in the new South African subtree. What do you think of them? Do they look like ones that will be exciting for you? After a test drive, I can tell you that off-road they're going to be a doggy, like many of the wheeled vehicles in War Thunder. But they should be interesting from an armament standpoint and give some additional breadth to the British ground tree. Let me know what you think in the comments, and we'll have that the next dev blog for you shortly. You have a great one. As the Ratel ZT3-A2 is another modification of the English is my primary language. Just say it.